Welcome to the second part of the podcast about trauma. In the first part, we covered the generic understanding of what it means for an individual. The second part will focus on a more professional approach and what can be done to support children and families. So just to get us into the context, what I would like to ask you about is some word of wisdom advice for professionals. And when I say professionals, I'm particularly keen on people who work within the community. And in our case, that would be supplementary school education, which, as you know, is out of school setting. It's not a mainstream school setting, yet it's got the same level of responsibility. How we as professionals working with those children and their parents, because don't forget, kids do come with parents. What are the things that we should be very mindful of when dealing with trauma in those settings?
I think the main thing is that senior leaders, practitioners, youth workers, volunteers recognise that trauma doesn't start and end with children, young people and their families. Trauma can be felt organisationally as well. And so in order for us to start thinking about trauma in that context in an education space or an out of school space, it requires everyone to be involved. So you touched on not forgetting children have parents. So that's that co-production. What are parents and children, what are their day-to-days look like? What might they be bringing into that space? But then equally staff. Right? Staff are not away from experiencing different levels of trauma at any given point of their journey. And then we've got senior leaders and everything that's happening with resources and funding, and all of that can create traumatic work environments for people, which ultimately just trickles down to the children, young people and the families. And so it's really about understanding that this can touch us, even if we have great days in the office, even if everyone's wonderful, it can still be impactful on an organisational level.
Yeah. Do you want to mention the different types of trauma for us professionals that we prompted?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we touched on in the first part around those one-off types of trauma and equally complex trauma that occurs within the context of relationship. Within an organisational context, here we're thinking about things around moral injury and moral distress. So that, simply put, is when we feel if we operate or practice in this way, this will be really good for the child or young person. So if we could just have a bit more time with the child, if we could extend the lesson time, if we could get whatever that might be, but the system doesn't allow for that. And so that becomes a conflict for our internal beliefs and values, that if we could just do this, and then we're watching day to day the impacts of the not just being able to do that thing we thought would be really beneficial. So that's that moral distress and moral injury where we start feeling as though, we lose compassion for sometimes. And so the distress or the injury, might be that we change the way we practice. So we might start to feel, well, what's the point in going this little extra mile for families and children? What's the point in making that referral? Because it never goes anywhere anyway. And so now we're seeing our practices being changed by that. Equally, I touched on compassion. So staff can experience what's known as compassion fatigue. That's ultimately where we are giving 100% empathy and compassion to children, young people all of the time. But we're hearing very similar experiences. And ultimately we start to do this thing, or our brain does, where we might hierarchy. This family really struggling. That family, it's not as bad. They could be all right. But for that family, we often miss the key point of, for them, this is significant and this is, really impactful for them. They don't know, another family in a worse, as you've determined its situation. So we have compassion fatigue, and then secondary trauma and vicarious trauma is really impactful. That's where we're in spaces where children, young people and families are sharing their traumatic experiences with us. And I think, obviously, Isabella will touch on in a moment, but from a therapeutic level, the research has shown that the more you hear other people's traumatic experiences, the more it shifts or is likely to shift your worldview. So if you're constantly hearing women who have experienced domestic violence, it can start to over time shift how you view men or how you view particular people. And so that's that secondary and vicarious trauma impacts can be really impactful.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And I just wanted to add physical trauma, because it's another department, I would say. It starts with little children running around, falling over something and having scratch on their knee. So our role is to, as quick as possible, come and do magic kiss or plaster or whatever, and the child will forgive and forget for good. The little traumas, the physical traumas, they're building up, as Gabo Mata said. It's like a spreadsheet theory. There is every year is like a white spreadsheet, and we put little black stones represents traumas, and another year another stones, and another year. So sometimes this builds massive problem based on experienced traumas. Sometimes they're going in between, so there is no visible side of trauma really, and responses as well. Anyways, physical trauma is hard as well, because based on our brain is very specific about pain. We remember much more based on pain, because we need to be aware in the future that if something happened and cause pain, we have to remember to avoid this next time. So the strength of memories is very significant, and that's why we remember many physical traumas as well. Just to add to what you said,
the different types of trauma.
Yeah.
What I was just thinking, and I think that's where I would like this to kind of concentrate moving forward for the supplementary school settings, which we know there are plenty in the UK. You mentioned the moral distress, and that got me thinking straight away, actually, in those settings, which are very much embedded within the community, we've got an immense power to actually act the way we would like to act, which perhaps might be more difficult for the mainstream education for all sorts of reasons. So why do you think it's so important for those settings where we teach children, where we've got the community focus, why is it so important for those settings to become trauma informed, something which I know Bernardo's really, really good at? So could you take us through, why would you advise any supplementary school to become fully trauma informed? What does it give the organisation?
I think the key thing when you mentioned about the moral injury and distress is really key to point out that we might not feel it or face it in our own organisation, but by nature and default of working in education, even if it's out of school settings and supplementary settings, is you're forced to working with other organisations, and that can create that moral injury. Oh, I made that referral, or I've contacted, or our children are in other spaces and they're not receiving that community-based support. And so that can equally do it. But I think becoming trauma-informed, and I always have to say this as a caveat, it is not an end journey again, just like understanding our own self and triggers and so forth, because it is a journey. And the key benefits of it are staff well-being. So becoming trauma-informed isn't just about understanding trauma that children and families might experience or communities. It's having a commitment to staff well-being, having a commitment to cultural awareness or anti-racist practice. It's embedding key principles in our practice, but also in our policies. So we often know that there'll be organisations where practitioners are trauma-informed, as I call myself a trauma-informed practitioner, but it doesn't always represent the organisation people are working in. And so it really does take top-down, bottom-up approach. Senior leaders have to be all behind it and backing it and putting that into practice, but also putting it into policy as well.
This is something that we can work on with schools, and we actually have been working with Bernardo's, which I'm so pleased about. But again, just moving into some practical advice and strategies, what can our practitioners do, or what strategies can be used to actually support and others and co-regulate others within the institution? What would you say, or what do we do? Maybe you can share what you do within our setting as well.
Well, I follow was 2 or 3 years ago when I joined the Family Links Nurturing Program. Brilliant course, brilliant training. And in general, in the journey, in the process of, as you mentioned, being with parents and children in a supplementary school, we're observing a lot of different behavior. And to understand is the first thing, to see their point of view. So it's not only understand the person, the parent or child in their behavior, is also be in their shoes for a minute or two, to catch the perspective and see what happened before, what caused the certain actions and reactions. Then we can show them that it's okay to work on this, because many people with their own traumas or post-traumas, they carry on with it, they hiding, they're denying, and doing other things which show they're stressed and ashamed, etc., etc. So that's why it's so important to nurture as a program nurture for parents and for staff as well, because staff are parents as well.
Well, absolutely. I was just about to say that in majority of cases for the supplementary education, the staff, the volunteers are the parents of those children. So there is a very close relationship between one and the other. But what I wanted to also ask you about is how to embed trauma-informed practice beyond just the theory, beyond just the policies and procedures. What would it look like?
In daily practice, that would look like, again, thinking about safeguarding, thinking about, as Isabella's touched on, that nurturing awareness. That's things like being shame sensitive. So being mindful that parents, carers and the children that you're working with, just because they didn't act like this yesterday doesn't mean that it might not start to become a new behaviour tomorrow. And so being curious about that and nurturing as well. And I think it also just starts to have us thinking about, what does this space need to look like? So if we have access to, or we have any autonomy over the space, how does it feel to be here? Even though we think we're safe, and we hope we are, right? We might not always be the right people at the right time for different children and families. And so what was somebody's journey like here? When they get here, are they met with compassion? You know, if they call us, are they hearing somebody who's understanding and giving time and space? Are they, when they're in our space, do they feel nurtured and respected? And does that translate in all the spaces, rather than just there's one or two practitioners that are very kind and caring and nurturing and respectful and so forth? So I do think it's about making it a consistent across the board, as where possible. But ultimately, how does it feel to be here on a day-to-day? And I think often when we're working in that space, we just see it as our workspace, and we often forget that for everybody else this isn't a workspace. This is their safe space. Often this is the one space where they can engage with their identity, their religion and who they are in a cultural context. And so just really thinking about, what does this look like if I was a child in this space? What does this look like as a parent in this space? What does this look like if I'm not having a great day in this space? And then we can start to address or review our own. So, and different spaces will be doing really well, and other spaces will need some development. But I think it's always a good starting point to think of it like that.
You know, the way you talk about it, it seems that it's really easy, but we know it's not. And also from my own professional experience, a lot of people within those settings who happen to have this role of the safeguarding lead or the managers, the head teachers of those settings, they'll say, oh, that's all great, but we've got limited resources, we're not funded by the government, there's lots of issues that we have to overcome. There is also a sense of loneliness very often, and isolation, and also I'd say confidence, because it's a it's a supplementary school provision, it's not the mainstream. As I said, it's not government funded. Obviously the responsibility of safeguarding those children, those families, still stays.
Absolutely.
That's the legal duty, there's no question about it. But if you were to give an advice to those professionals in those positions who listen to us perhaps now, what would be the advice you would give to them? Because there's a huge level of responsibility, I don't doubt it, but where do they go and seek help? How do they approach the whole thing so they don't feel that they are there on their own?
I guess, again, that comes into our senior leaders. How are they providing that safety for staff? Recognising everything you've just said. But I think for practitioners, be them teachers, volunteers, or support staff, I think it's really important for them to consider, how do I ensure we're not re-traumatising people? Given the statistics we understand about trauma and childhood adversity, the likelihood is we'll be coming into contact with people who have experienced trauma. It's more likely than not. Yeah. And so even if our starting point is, how do I reduce the likelihood that I might re-traumatise somebody, either as an individual or because of our service? And so that then helps us start to think about the things we can do, and often they're quick wins. I know for some people they'll hear this and it's a journey and it takes time, and you have to understand the neuroscience and what the body's doing and regulation. It feels like a lot, but often one of the things I find is people are already doing it and they just don't know that's what they're doing. If you're leading with compassion, if you're, creating safe spaces, you're probably already doing a lot of the things on the journey to becoming trauma informed. And most people will be. You've mentioned their parents of the children who attend, and they're part of the likelihood is they'll be doing this for the compassionate, right reasons anyway. And so I think it's all about, but if we have somebody in our space who has or is currently going through a traumatic experience, how do we respond? So that be reporting safeguarding concerns or children disclosing things to us. Are we horrified and shocked, or do we respond with compassion and care? And so, I'd think about it that way. How do we reduce re-traumatising somebody?
That's a very valid point, Isabella.
Yeah, when you mention re-traumatise, I just remember the phenomenon of how we affect our children on the way. We can traumatize child with a one sentence in one moment. Again, we need to say to the child 500 times things to engage the child with information. And this is phenomenal because we don't know when and how we can traumatize our child or re-traumatize. Right. So this just reminded me of, it's hard. So yes, definitely all of the regulations is needed. And as a organization already existing, we need some pattern, I would say, to add structure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So so it's very important. Yeah, I agree. Brilliant.
The bottom line is start from ourselves, be aware ourselves, and then be trauma informed is definitely worth it for the organisation, for the well-being of ourselves as well as everybody in our care. So, and it's a journey. So what I'm taking from your lovely contributions today is that it's a journey. So being compassionate, being patient, being understanding, being kind is a good starting point. And as human beings, let's hope that this is what we all have got in common, despite of all the nonsense that's happening out there. But it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you two, and so thank you so much for sharing your immense knowledge and being absolutely brilliant. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
If any of those things that we've discussed today around trauma interested you, or you would like to find a bit more about it, or you want to know where to seek additional help, please check the description under this video and get in touch with us, and we will be happy to have a conversation with you.